memory, walked in the house with the axe. Okay, mom said this. I visualized what she said in a paragraph. And I just beat it.
I know which one. We're going to make them take this.
Okay, to take me
You go to our jail here and transfer
to jail?
Yeah.
I just hope that this doesn't really affect too much because it's still college.
It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Inverness, Florida. The kind of quiet day where people cut their grass, walk their dogs, or sit out on their porches with a glass of iced tea. But inside one house on Adams Street, something had gone terribly wrong. Inside that home, a 57-year-old woman was found dead. She was sitting in her recliner, the television still playing in the background. Her head had been struck multiple times with a splitting axe. The murder weapon was left behind. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The only other person in the house was her 17-year-old adopted son. He was the one who called 911. He told the dispatcher he had found his mother like that. He sounded calm, too calm. When police arrived, they found the scene exactly as he had described. Except something didn't feel right. The way the body was positioned, the silence in the house, the teenager's story. It didn't all add up. Less than 48 hours later, he confessed. He told detectives he had taken the axe from the backyard. He had waited until she was asleep. Then, he stood over her, and he swung. Why did it happen? What led to this? Who was Denise? Who was the boy she brought into her family? What signs were missed? This is not just another story about a crime. It's a story about trust, about decisions, about what happens when love meets a wall it can't climb. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this story. Please give the video a thumbs up. It really helps support the channel and allows us to continue sharing more stories like this one. Your support means a lot. In this documentary, we will follow the facts. From Denise's life as a devoted educator, through her years as a mother, to the warning signs she tried to fix, and the shocking act that ended it all. We will hear how the investigation unfolded, how the confession came to light, and how the courtroom heard the truth. This is the case of Denise Hallowell. Before we start, please, I want to hear from you. What do you think could drive a child to harm the very person who gave them a second chance at life? Before her name was in news reports or court files, Denise Hallowell was just a teacher, a woman who dedicated her life to helping young people grow. She was soft-spoken, well-educated, and deeply involved in the classroom. Her co-workers said she loved her job. Her students remembered her as the kind of teacher who never gave up on anyone. Denise had a long career in education. She spent many years teaching students with special needs. She understood that every child was different. She also believed that no child was too difficult to help. Some people teach for a paycheck. Denise taught because she believed it could change lives. She didn't stay in one place. For some time, she lived and worked in the Caribbean, where she taught at a private school on Roatan, an island off the coast of Honduras. Life on the island was peaceful, far from the stress of city life. But it wasn't just about location. It was about the mission. Denise wanted to serve communities that lacked resources. That's who she was. At some point, while still working in education overseas, she began to feel that teaching wasn't enough. She didn't just want to help children during school hours. She wanted to bring one home. She wanted to adopt. It wasn't a decision she made lightly. Denise was single. She didn't have family nearby, but she felt called to do it anyway. She believed she had enough love, strength, and patience to raise a child on her own. That's when she adopted a young boy from Guatemala. His name was James. He had been in a difficult situation and needed a home. Denise believed she could give him one. She brought him into her life, offered him a bed, a room, and more importantly, stability. Have you ever known someone who gave up everything to help children? What do you think keeps people like that going? Share your thoughts below. She left the Caribbean and moved back to Florida. There, she bought a home in Inverness, a quiet neighborhood where children rode bikes down the street and neighbors still waved hello. It was the kind of place Denise thought would be safe and healing for a young boy who had already seen too much. Denise was excited about motherhood. She enrolled James in school. She attended parent meetings. She supported him in every way she could. According to people who knew her, she didn't just provide the basics. She wanted James to feel seen, to feel safe, to feel loved. She also homeschooled him at times, especially when he began struggling in traditional classrooms. Denise, being a teacher herself, believed she could guide him better at home. She believed one-on-one teaching could make a difference. And maybe it did, for a while. Their home was filled with books, learning materials, and quiet routines. But even as Denise gave everything she had, something inside her son began to shift. Still, Denise didn't give up. Even when things got hard, she stood by him. She was more than just a teacher. She was a mother who believed that love was enough. The early days weren't easy. Adoption stories rarely are. James had trouble adjusting to the rules and routines of his new life. Simple things, like sitting still for lessons, following directions, or responding to kindness, often led to frustration. Denise, however, remained calm. She didn't yell. She didn't give up. She believed structure and love could help him grow. Over the years, people who knew Denise described her as patient. She homeschooled James during periods when school environments became too overwhelming. Some neighbors noticed that the boy kept to himself. He didn't play with other kids in the neighborhood. He often stayed indoors, either doing lessons or sitting alone in the yard. A former co-worker of Denise once said, "She gave up everything to raise him. She wanted to be there for him full time. She didn't want him to feel abandoned again." At one point, Denise adopted a second child, an older boy. For a while, she had 2 sons under her care. But that situation didn't last long. There were conflicts in the house, verbal fights, behavioral concerns. Eventually, she made the difficult decision to send the older child away. It was not something she did lightly, but Denise believed James needed her full attention. After the other child left, it was just her and James again. Denise poured all her energy into him. She was careful with his schedule, his meals, and even his therapy. She wanted to believe that if she stayed consistent, things would improve. But as James entered his teenage years, the signs grew more concerning. He began having intense mood swings. At times, he was quiet and cooperative. At other times, he became angry over small things. Denise, according to friends, expressed concern that she couldn't always reach him emotionally. He would shut down. He would isolate. And when he got upset, he could become defiant. There are reports that, during those years, Denise contacted child psychologists. She also sought behavioral evaluations. She didn't hide the issues. She tried to deal with them the best way she knew how, as a teacher and a mother, through structure, understanding, and professional support. One neighbor recalled hearing shouting from inside the house one night. Another remembered seeing James walking alone in the yard, expression blank, not speaking. But no one ever called the police. No one suspected anything violent would ever happen. Denise was known to speak privately about the difficulties of parenting a child with a trauma background, but she never gave the impression that she felt unsafe. She was focused on healing, on moving forward. In her mind, James was her son, and even though the challenges were growing, she wasn't going to walk away from him. She had chosen this path. She believed he could still change. As James entered his teenage years, things inside the Hallowell home began to change. What started as small struggles, things like not finishing homework or refusing to follow simple instructions, slowly grew into more serious concerns. Denise, who had spent most of her life guiding troubled students, started facing behaviors she hadn't fully prepared for at home. James struggled in school. His academic performance began to slip. He had trouble staying focused. He often failed to complete assignments. At times, he refused to participate at all. Denise, ever the educator, tried different methods. She changed lesson plans. She adjusted routines. She even reached out for professional help. But nothing seemed to stick. Outside of academics, his attitude was shifting. He became more withdrawn. At other times, he showed bursts of anger that caught people off guard. Denise shared with a few close contacts that he could be unpredictable. One moment he was quiet. The next, he was shouting, slamming doors, ignoring boundaries. She wasn't afraid of him. Not yet. But she was concerned. She spoke to a counselor. She looked into therapeutic support. There were signs James was holding onto something deep, something that wouldn't come out with words. Denise wanted to believe it was just a phase, a difficult teenage period, a boy trying to process his past. But as time passed, the outbursts didn't stop. They grew stronger. There were no official reports of violence, no criminal record. But Denise was documenting the behavior at home. She kept notes. She tracked changes. She didn't want to miss anything important. What worried her most was how James began shutting her out completely. He stopped responding when she tried to talk to him about serious topics. He grew attached to his phone, to the internet, and to his electronics. They became his world. Whenever she tried to enforce rules about screen time, about communication, about respect, he pushed back harder. Do you believe love alone is enough to heal the pain a child carries from their past? Please share your thoughts in the comment section. Then, not long before the murder, something happened. According to investigators, Denise had recently taken away James's electronics. She had confiscated his phone and computer after discovering something that disturbed her. The full details of what she saw were never made public, but reports say it had to do with his behavior, possibly something he was watching or saying online. This action, her removing his electronics, appears to have been a major turning point. For James, those devices weren't just for entertainment. They were a lifeline, a place where he could escape, control, and avoid. When Denise took them, it wasn't just a punishment. It was, in his eyes, a final line being crossed. The tension in the house grew sharper after that. Denise may not have known just how deep the resentment had become. Neighbors noticed the home had grown even quieter. One person remembered seeing James outside, pacing by the shed. Another said Denise looked tired, like something was weighing on her. Still, no one expected what would happen next. No one imagined that a boy who had been given a second chance would soon take away the very life of the woman who gave it to him. On the morning of July 13, 2019, the sun had already risen over the quiet neighborhood in Inverness, Florida. Denise Hallowell's home sat still, no signs of movement, no sounds from the yard. From the outside, nothing looked out of place. Then, sometime later that day, a 911 call came in. The voice on the line was calm, almost distant. It was James. He told dispatchers that he had come home and found his mother unresponsive. He said she was sitting in her recliner chair. He didn't know what had happened. He needed help. Emergency responders arrived at the scene shortly after. Inside the house, they found Denise, just as James had described. She was in her chair, motionless. But something was clearly wrong. The scene was disturbing. The damage to her head was severe. Investigators quickly determined that this was not an accident. It wasn't natural causes. It was a homicide. The murder weapon was identified as a splitting axe, an ordinary tool kept on the Hallowell property, the kind used for chopping firewood. It had been taken from outside and used in the attack. Authorities secured the scene and began collecting evidence. The home was carefully searched. Denise's body was examined. Her injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma to the head. The autopsy would later confirm this. There were multiple wounds, all fatal. Police took James in for questioning. At first, he stuck to his story. He said he had been using his computer in the guest house earlier in the day. He claimed he came back into the main house and found her like that. He acted surprised. He said he had no idea what happened. But something wasn't adding up. The timeline James gave didn't match certain details found at the scene. Investigators noticed things in the house that pointed to a different story, one that James wasn't telling. And quietly, as they studied the evidence, a new picture started to form, one that would change the entire direction of the case. As the investigation began, detectives immediately noticed that something didn't feel right. Do you think digital evidence should always be trusted in a murder case? Or can it sometimes mislead investigators? Share your thoughts below. James had said he was in the guest house at the time of the murder, claiming he discovered his mother hours later. But there were gaps in his timeline. Some things didn't add up. Inside the home, there were no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had broken in. The axe used in the murder came from the property. There were no defensive wounds on Denise's hands. Investigators believed she never saw it coming. Detectives started asking questions. Where exactly had James been? Why did he wait so long to call 911? Was there any evidence to back up his story? They spoke to neighbors. Some reported seeing James moving between the guest house and the main house earlier in the day. Others said they didn't hear or see anything unusual. One person recalled that the family seemed quieter than usual in the days leading up to the crime. But it was the digital evidence that gave the most clarity. Police obtained a search warrant for James's phone and computer. What they found made everything much clearer. The data showed activity during the hours James claimed he wasn't inside the house. Messages, internet searches, deleted files. Some of it suggested he was preparing to cover his tracks. Other parts showed attempts to erase his activity. When investigators checked for fingerprints on the axe handle, they couldn't confirm a match. It had been wiped clean. But that, in itself, raised concern. Forensic teams also looked at James's shoes, clothes, and the path between the guest house and the main residence. Small traces of material were taken in for testing. Though nothing directly tied him to the murder at first, the overall evidence began pointing in one direction. James Carlos Hallowell was now the only person with a clear opportunity. The timeline was too tight. The stories didn't match. And most importantly, there was no sign that anyone else had entered or exited that home. A few days into the investigation, detectives brought James back in for more questioning. This time, their approach was different. They showed him the evidence. They challenged his claims. They pressed him to explain the things that didn't make sense. James didn't confess. But by then, police no longer needed him to. The circumstantial evidence, paired with the digital findings and the inconsistencies in his story, gave them what they needed. James was arrested and charged with the murder of his adoptive mother. The boy Denise had once brought home from Guatemala, the child she had raised, protected, and believed in, was now the main suspect in her brutal death. It wasn't long after the arrest that the truth began to unfold. During a formal interview with detectives, recorded and documented, James Hallowell finally broke down. After holding on to his story for days, he admitted what investigators had already suspected. He confessed to killing his adoptive mother. James said he waited until Denise was asleep in her recliner chair. Then he went outside and retrieved the axe from their property. He walked back into the living room. Quiet, focused, and without warning, he struck her. He didn't give a long explanation. He didn't show much emotion. When asked why he did it, he gave a simple answer. He was angry. Angry about the punishment. Angry that she had taken away his electronics. Angry that he felt controlled. Detectives listened carefully. They asked questions to confirm details. James's answers matched the evidence they had collected, the timeline, the weapon, the position of the body, and the lack of forced entry. It was clear this wasn't an impulsive act. He had planned it. He waited for the right moment. Law enforcement later released a statement confirming the confession. They stated that James Hallowell had been charged with first-degree premeditated murder. They confirmed that the weapon used was a splitting axe from the property. They also shared that he had been taken into custody without incident. The community was shocked. Neighbors who had watched James grow up couldn't believe what they were hearing. Teachers who had known Denise were heartbroken. There were no public signs that something like this would happen. But now, the facts were laid bare. The confession sealed the case. James had admitted to killing the very person who had given him a home, a second chance, a future. He was just 17 years old. After James's confession, the legal process began, and the weight of his actions would soon be faced in court. James was formally charged with first-degree murder. The evidence was clear. The confession was damning. The prosecution had a strong case, but the question that remained was what would happen next. How would the court handle a case involving a young man who had brutally taken the life of his adoptive mother? Because of his age, 17, James was initially considered for a juvenile trial. However, due to the severity of the crime and the nature of the charge, he was tried as an adult. The trial began months after his arrest, and the prosecution wasted no time building its case. They presented the confession, which was crucial in demonstrating James's premeditated intent. The prosecution also used forensic evidence, including the murder weapon, DNA traces, and the lack of any forced entry into the home. They painted a picture of a crime that was planned and deliberate. A son who had become so angry over discipline and control that he made the decision to kill. One of the most disturbing aspects of the trial was the detailed explanation of James's motive. The prosecution argued that James's rage had been building for some time. They pointed to his escalating behavior, the confiscation of his electronics, and his feelings of being trapped and controlled by his mother. The attack, they said, wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision but a calculated act of violence in response to Denise's rules. The defense team, in turn, did what they could to explain James's actions. They presented the argument that his troubled past, his adoption, his emotional issues, and the struggles with his behavioral health contributed to his actions. They argued that James's mental state played a significant role in what happened. The defense's strategy was to ask the jury to consider his age and his mental health when determining sentencing. At one point, James's defense team put forward the possibility that the murder was not premeditated, suggesting that it might have been an act of temporary insanity, though they did not go as far as fully pursuing an insanity defense. Instead, they suggested that James had snapped, overcome by feelings of anger and frustration that had been building for years. Court documents and testimony also highlighted the emotional weight of the case. Family members of Denise, although deeply saddened by her death, expressed a desire for justice. One of Denise's close friends testified, painting a portrait of the loving woman she had known, the teacher, the adoptive mother, and the person who always gave others a chance. They spoke about the mother who had tried everything to help James, even when his behavior seemed impossible to manage. After a lengthy trial, the jury deliberated. The verdict was clear. James Hallowell was convicted of first-degree murder. In the sentencing phase, the judge acknowledged James's age, but also emphasized the severity of the crime. The prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence allowed under Florida law. In the end, James was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, the judge made a statement. What occurred in this case was tragic beyond words. A mother lost her life, and a young man's future was forever changed. The law must reflect the severity of what happened here. James did not speak during sentencing, nor did he show visible emotion. It was the end of a long legal battle, but the pain of Denise's loss would continue to ripple through her community and her family. James Hallowell's conviction for the first-degree murder of his adoptive mother, Denise, was finalized in 2022. The gravity of the crime had been clear throughout the trial, and the sentencing brought a somber closure to a case that had shocked everyone who knew the family. In a statement after the trial, Denise's best friend, who had been close to the family for years, said, "I'll never understand how or why this happened." Denise gave everything for James. She loved him with all her heart. She never gave up on him, even when things were difficult. This is a tragedy for everyone involved. Denise's co-workers, who had known her as a dedicated educator, remembered her fondly. One of her colleagues shared, "Denise didn't just teach children, she believed in them. She was an advocate for them, and she went above and beyond." The loss we feel isn't just the loss of a friend, but of a light that guided so many young people. Denise Hallowell was more than just a teacher. She was a woman with a vision, a mother who saw the potential in a young boy from Guatemala and brought him into her home with the hope of giving him a better life. As an educator, she devoted herself to her students, always striving to make a difference in their lives. As an adoptive mother, she gave everything she had to James, trying, despite all odds, to help him find his place in the world. Her death, at the hands of the very son she had raised, was a tragedy beyond words. It was a loss that rippled through the community, leaving behind a deep wound that no amount of time could heal. The world lost a compassionate educator, a loving mother, and a woman who gave all she had to others. But James lost more than just a mother. He lost the possibility of a future shaped by care and understanding, replaced by the harsh reality of prison. This case raises difficult questions about the complexities of adoptive parenting. No one can fully understand the emotional toll that adopting a child can take, especially when that child comes with a troubled past, as James did. The psychological scars of abandonment, trauma, and emotional turmoil don't disappear with love alone. It's a stark reminder that adolescence is a fragile time, and when combined with mental health challenges, it can create an unpredictable and dangerous path. But even in this tragedy, there are lessons to be learned. The complexities of mental health, the need for better support for families dealing with behavioral issues, and the importance of understanding the signs of emotional distress. These are crucial. We must continue to ask ourselves how we can better protect both children and parents, and how we can intervene before it's too late. As we conclude this story, we reflect on its deep, human impact. The loss of Denise Hallowell will forever remain a painful chapter in the lives of those who knew her. And James Hallowell, though young, now faces the consequences of a moment that will haunt him for the rest of his life. This case reminds us that behind every headline is a deeper human story, one of hope, struggle, and irreversible consequences. It's a tragic reminder that, sometimes, the wounds we cannot see can shape lives in ways we can never predict. Thank you for taking the time to watch and reflect on this deeply heartbreaking case. If you found this story important, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring more awareness to the real-life stories that matter. See you in my next video.